Imagine a person who's always kind, compassionate, and morally upright, someone who would never hurt another soul, who stands for justice, helps others without expecting anything in return. Now, imagine that same person becoming unrecognizable, capable of cruelty, deception, even destruction. What causes this transformation? How does someone go from being good to becoming a monster? Today, we'll uncover the psychological and philosophical forces that shape human nature, revealing the hidden mechanisms that push good people toward darkness. The final revelation will change how you see human nature forever. This isn't just theoretical. This transformation affects all of us. You might think you're immune to these forces, but history and science tell a different story. Psychologist Philip Zimbardo, creator of the Stanford prison experiment, showed how ordinary people, placed in certain circumstances, can commit acts of cruelty. Studies from Stanley Milgram also prove that our sense of morality is far more fragile than we think. The terrifying truth is, most people don't realize they're changing until it's too late. What drives this change? What unseen influences slowly wear down the goodness in a person? The truth is unsettling, but only by understanding this process can we prevent it from happening to ourselves. First, there's the slow erosion of moral boundaries. It doesn't happen overnight. It starts with small compromises. A person might justify a minor wrongdoing or bend the rules for a good cause, thinking it doesn't really matter. But once the first boundary is crossed, the next becomes easier. This is known as the slippery slope effect, and over time, these small justifications reshape a person's identity. What once was unthinkable now seems reasonable. Then, there's the influence of authority. In one of the most chilling psychological studies, Stanley Milgram's experiment showed that people, even those with good intentions, would administer harmful shocks to another person simply because an authority figure told them to. This reveals a terrifying truth. Even good people, under the right pressure, can cause harm, convincing themselves they were just following orders. Another key factor is the power of group identity. When people become deeply attached to a group, they begin to see those outside the group as other. This dehumanization allows people to justify harm, believing their victims are undeserving of empathy. History is full of examples of good people who were led into committing horrific acts because they viewed their enemies as less than human. At this point, the most unsettling question arises. Could it happen to you? Under the right pressures, could you become something you never thought possible? The answer is more complicated than you might think. And in the next section, we'll dive deeper into the psychology of justification, the illusion of righteousness, and the final dangerous step in this descent. One of the most dangerous aspects of this transformation is self-deception. People begin to believe their actions are justified, that they're doing the right thing, even when they're not. This is where the real danger lies, the moment when a person convinces themselves that their transformation is for the greater good. People rarely see themselves as villains, even when committing terrible acts. Instead, they create narratives to justify their actions, convincing themselves they are still good and righteous. This is where cognitive dissonance comes in. Psychologist Leon Festinger introduced the concept, explaining the mental discomfort we experience when our actions contradict our beliefs. Rather than changing their behavior, people often change their beliefs to justify their actions. For example, someone who sees themselves as kind may find themselves harming others. To cope, they may tell themselves, "I had no choice," or "they deserved it." This self-justification lets them maintain the illusion of goodness even when doing things they once thought unthinkable. Throughout history, people have committed atrocities, believing they were doing the right thing. Once their inner conscience is silenced, the descent into darkness accelerates. But cognitive dissonance alone doesn't explain everything. There's another force at work, the illusion of righteousness. People often believe their actions are justified, seeing themselves as superior to others. This is called moral licensing. When people see themselves as good, they feel entitled to do bad things without guilt. For instance, a person who donates to charity may feel less guilty about lying later. A leader fighting for justice may feel justified in silencing opposition. Ironically, the more people see themselves as righteous, the more blind they become to their moral failures. Some of history's greatest horrors were committed not by evil people, but by those who thought they were on the right side of history. One of the most dangerous steps in the transformation of good people into monsters is dehumanization. When people see others as enemies or obstacles, their moral restraints collapse. This is how cruelty and violence are justified. Soldiers, for example, are trained to see enemies not as people, but as threats. Political and ideological conflicts often turn vicious because both sides see each other as subhuman. Once someone stops seeing another person as human, they feel free to harm them. This doesn't only happen on a large scale. It happens every day in workplaces, relationships, and online interactions. People justify cruelty toward colleagues, partners, and strangers because they no longer see them as real people. And it can happen to anyone. So, if good people can turn into monsters, how do we prevent it? The answer lies in self-awareness. Many believe they are immune to corruption simply because they see themselves as good. But as we've seen, morality is fragile, and good intentions alone aren't enough. The belief, "I could never do that," is often the first step toward moral blindness. Self-awareness means acknowledging our own capacity for wrongdoing. It means understanding that under the right pressures, we too could be led astray. Recognizing this vulnerability is crucial in preventing it. Regular self-reflection, questioning our actions, motives, and justifications, helps us stay connected to our core values. Only by staying aware of our own potential for harm can we guard against it. What if you've been justifying your actions all along? What if everything you believed about your morality, your sense of right and wrong, could be reshaped by those around you? Imagine this. What if someone else were doing what you're doing right now? Would you still think it's acceptable? These questions force us to face an uncomfortable reality. We are all capable of justifying harm when it suits us. But here's the truth. Awareness alone is not enough. We need to develop the strength to resist these temptations. This is where moral courage comes in. It's easy to stand by your principles when there's no cost. But true moral strength shows itself when doing the right thing means sacrifice, facing rejection, losing status, or even comfort. History is filled with stories of those who failed this test, those who went along with injustice because it was easier, who remained silent when others suffered. But it's also filled with those who passed, people who resisted, refused to conform, and chose integrity over convenience. What makes these individuals stand against corruption? A strong internal moral compass. It's built on understanding your values, practicing small acts of integrity every day, and refusing to compromise. The more you compromise on small things, the easier it is to compromise on bigger ones. Another key factor? Empathy. Empathy cuts through the illusions that lead to harmful actions. When we truly understand others, when we hear their stories, recognize their struggles, it's much harder to justify cruelty. Studies show that even brief connections can drastically reduce prejudice and hostility. But here's the most important truth. Corruption is never a single event. It's a slow process built on tiny compromises and gradual shifts. Stopping it requires constant vigilance, self-reflection, and the courage to act when it matters most. Now, there's one final, terrifying truth behind why good people become monsters: the environment. More than personal flaws or weaknesses, it's the world around us, the systems, the cultures, the influences that shape who we become. Psychologist Philip Zimbardo coined the term the Lucifer effect to explain how ordinary people commit evil under the right circumstances. People are not born evil. They are shaped by their environment. Think about the systems we live in. A workplace that tolerates unethical behavior, a society that normalizes prejudice, a culture that rewards aggression over compassion. These environments breed the monsters within us. The shocking reality? We are not immune to this process. If we don't actively shape the environments around us, even the best of us can be led astray. Understanding this is the first step to protecting ourselves and others from this transformation. We must surround ourselves with people who challenge us, who demand better from us, who hold us accountable when we stray from our values. The right environment can be a powerful force for good, just as the wrong one can lead us into darkness. But here's the most unsettling question of all. If the environment shapes who we are, how much of our true selves is really under our control? The answer is both terrifying and liberating. While we can't always control the world around us, we can control how we respond to it. We have the power to choose awareness over ignorance, courage over conformity, empathy over indifference. We can resist the small compromises that erode our morality. We can ask the hard questions, challenge harmful norms, and refuse to let the world dictate who we become. And most importantly, we must remember that the battle between good and evil isn't happening outside of us. It's happening inside us, every day, in every choice we make. As the philosopher Alexander Solzhenitsyn famously said, "The line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being." This is the final, terrifying truth. There are no absolute monsters. There are no absolute saints. There are only people who are shaped by their choices, their surroundings, and their willingness to confront the darkness within. So, ask yourself, who are you becoming? Are your choices strengthening your integrity? Or are small compromises leading you down a path you never intended? Are you shaping your environment? Or is your environment shaping you? Because in the end, the difference between a good person and a monster isn't fate. It's choice. And that choice is yours every single day.